Welcome to Break the Silence, Build the Future, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of survivors and advocates while shedding light on the pervasive issue of gender based violence. Join us on a journey where survivors find strength in sharing their stories and experts offer profound insight into this critical societal issue. Welcome to another episode of Break the Silence, Build the Future. In this episode titled Living with Grief, I will explore part of grief that shapes our identity and daily lives. Before I had this really deep loss, I thought it's something that you move on from. This happens and this happens with your grief, and you end up moving on with your life. But there is really no moving on from grief. You can't move away from it. You can't go on with your life. You have to allow grief to be part of you. So you learn to live alongside as part of your new normal. What that means is grief doesn't really disappear. It doesn't have a finish line or expiration date. Instead, it becomes part of who we are, a companion sort of, that we carry with us as we move forward in life. Today we're talking about what it means to live with grief. What does that even mean? How can you live with grief? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for your family? What does it mean for your friends? What does it mean for your life moving forward? So I want to talk about today how grief shapes your new identity. How can you find the purpose within it? And how can you create a future that includes both the love and the loss you have suffered? How do you do that? I want to share this story with you. We have family group chats in WhatsApp. I have family group chat with myself and my children, and then we have a family group chat where the entire extended family is, and then we have a family group chat where my siblings and I on it, and then my kids and their cousins have their own group chat. So my niece posted a picture of me holding my late daughter Zahra, an infant, maybe 7, 8, 9 months. So I'm guessing it was 1987 picture. So she posted that picture in a group chat that includes the entire extended family. And my nephew saw that picture and he said, sometimes it's so surreal. I can't believe, I can't wrap my head around it. And then he took it back and he said, don't want to get everybody emotional here, but it's just sometimes I sit there and I think, is it really real that she's gone? Did she really, is this it? That's what I ask myself. So everybody in the family, like I told you before, there's 56 of us, start sharing their own way of dealing with this grief. And my nephew was actually feeling bad for bringing it up. So we had to tell him that is normal. How you are making this grief as part of you, as part of your process, as part of you understanding what is it that we lost and how do we process this loss. And we went on with that. And you can imagine a lot of us in the family, we don't know where each one of us is in this grieving process. So it makes even difficult to bring it up. That's why my nephew, when he brought it up, as soon as he said that, he thought, oh, I don't want to get anybody else emotional. So he said, as a father, I can't imagine. And he sent a specific message addressed to me and said, I'm sorry, I can't imagine what you're going through. So you could see that right away he felt bad, that because he doesn't know where everybody else is in this continuum of the grieving process. She's been gone now 20 months, but still we are in the same process, but each one of us is on a different continuum, and we're almost afraid, at least I am, to approach it with the rest of the family, because I don't really know who is where. So that's what I mean when I say we are still trying to find a new normal that includes both the love and the loss. We can't really just have the love without the loss, and we cannot be buried under the loss. So we have to find a way to continue that. If you had asked me before I lost my daughter about grief, any question to do about grief, I would have assumed and used the technical version that says you will get through this. That's a term I would have used. You will get through this grief. Time will heal this. You will move through it. But there's no way to get through it. There is no another side of grief. It's not like you can get through it to get to the other side of this grief. You can't do that. It doesn't work like that. At least in my opinion, it doesn't work like that. I quickly realized there's no another side. Grief doesn't go away. It doesn't follow in any particular order. But what I found for myself is it changed the way you are. It changed the way you see things. It changed the way you interact with others. For me, it became like somebody giving me a new pair of glasses that I could look through things differently. My relationships, my advocacy, my own identity, who I consider myself to be. So, for example, if you invited me to give a presentation and you asked me to introduce myself, this is how I would introduce myself. I would introduce myself and say, my name is Fartumo Kusow. I am a mother by devotion, a daughter by dedication, a sister by love, a friend by choice, an educator by profession, and storyteller by birth. That's how I would introduce. If you ask me to introduce myself before my daughter was murdered. But now, if you ask me to introduce myself, this is how I would introduce myself. My name is Fartumo Kusow. My daughter, Zahra Adam Boule, went missing Friday, May 26, 2023. 12 days later, her husband of 18 years was arrested and charged with the first degree of her murder. So you could see this loss, this grief, changed my basic identity, who I consider myself to be. The idea of moving away or moving through feels impossible because you can't leave a loved one behind. Moving through and getting through grief would mean I am leaving my daughter behind. But I need to carry her with me. Her memories, her actions, her personality, her looks, her words, everything about her, I have to carry her with me. So I have to convert that grief into a purpose, something I can do to honor her without it destroying myself and without me leaving myself behind and my love behind. So the question is, how do you live with the grief? How do you go about living with it? Living with it doesn't mean you're going to cry every single day. You're going to lose every single day. And it doesn't mean you're going to forget and leave it behind. So how do you find your new normal in living with this grief? First step, in my opinion, is to accept it's okay for a grief to stay with you. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with you feeling the pain of the loss. Nothing. It will stay with you. But it doesn't mean you are struck or that you are destroyed. It means you are human. For me, finding my new normal after losing my daughter is embracing the routines and responsibilities of daily life. I am a caregiver to my mother who's 90 years old, bedridden, and lives with late stage Alzheimer's. So I had to embrace the daily routines. And I had to go to work so I can earn a living to take care of my mother. So I had to embrace the daily life. But that didn't mean I got through the grief. That means I allowed the space for my grief to exist. What does that mean? Some days that meant pausing to cry or reflect. And that was okay. There was nothing wrong with that, to cry, to reflect, to feel sorry for myself. Other days it meant finding joy, like laughing with my children over the phone, like working in my advocacy projects, helping another woman who's struggling. And I want you to know, if you're listening to this episode, your new normal would not look like anyone else's. Everybody's new normal is different. But your new normal, if you face any kind of grief, is about a life where grief has a place in your life without overwhelming everything else. The grief has a space to exist with you. Just like the joy and happiness that comes after a loss of a loved one has a space in your life. It's not either or situation. How could you do that? How could you get there? I think one of the most important thing is for you to find a purpose in the pain. I know that kind of feels contradictory. That feels like I'm giving you two things that cannot exist at the same time. How can purpose and pain coexist together? That's what it feels like, but it's not like that. Because one of the most powerful lessons I have learned is that grief can lead to purpose. When my daughter was taken from me, I felt like my world had ended. She was the eldest of my 5 children. She was very precious to me. But after months and months of wallowing in that grief, I realized I needed to find a way to honor her by using that grief, by using this unimaginable loss to fuel some changes that will honor her legacy. So she's not remembered for the last 10 or 12 days that marked the end of her life. I decided I was going to use this grief to support other women that might be in her situation. That's why I started Zahra Bula Foundation intended to offer an education, advocacy, and awareness to people, especially women fleeing violence. And under the foundation I hosted, in collaboration with University of Windsor, I Am Zahra Bula conference annually, and this December we did the second annual. I did Walk to End Silence in October, first annual, to raise funds, and we raised over $3,000 for NISA Foundation, a local shelter. I created this podcast, Break the Silence, Build the Future, in order to share my own personal experience and allow other people to share their personal experience about loss, life, and grief. These projects, these initiatives, these acts did not erase my grief. They didn't lessen the pain of losing my daughter. They don't change at night when I wake up in the middle of a nightmare and I think this didn't happen. I'm going to wake up from this dream. It didn't change when I wake up every morning and I think this really did happen. This was not a dream. This was not a nightmare. She is actually gone. Like my nephew said, it's so surreal to realize sometimes she's really gone. It didn't change any of that, but it gave my grief, my devastating loss, a purpose. When I say give your pain a purpose, it doesn't mean that it's something big or public. It can be as simple as planting a garden, creating art, helping someone else who's grieving. The purpose is simply channeling your pain into something that's meaningful to you. It doesn't have to be meaningful to anybody else as long as it means something to you. As long as you can see the purpose of whatever it is you're doing. Because we're all different. Even if your purpose is going to your place of worship more often than you did, even if the purpose is taking care of yourself a little more, even if the purpose is going to your physical check annually to make sure you are taking care of your health. Even if your purpose is helping your next door neighbor that's elderly that cannot get their grocery shopping done, so you are picking up the groceries for them. It doesn't have to be big and it doesn't have to be public. Your purpose could be praying for your loved one for peace and comfort if you believe in the hereafter. Just because I gave you examples of my purpose doesn't mean your purpose has to be like that. It is as specific and as individual as you are and as your loss is. For me, I learned so much about my grief. Grief taught me that living with grief doesn't mean forgetting about what happened, forgetting about your loss, or being stuck in your loss. It's about integrating that loss. It's about learning to carry your grief alongside your joy, alongside your hope, alongside your dreams, alongside your future. It also taught me that grief is a reflection, the mirror image of love. That's almost kind of like contradiction again. But grief is the reflection. When you look at the mirror and your face is reflected back to you, that is the reflection of love. What do I mean by that? The depth of your pain speaks to the depth of your connection. How much you had loved the person you lost, the relationship you lost, is equal to the depth of your pain, the depth of your grief. So by honoring the pain, by not wanting it to be done with and moved away from, by honoring that pain into purpose, in my opinion, means honoring the person you have lost, honoring the experience of that person, honoring the relationship you had that person that shaped who you are. Because I had a relationship with my daughter. She was my firstborn, so she made me a mother. So her loss began to reshape me again into somebody different. Before her loss, I went to work, I came home, I took care of my business. So that is the idea. Your pain would help you honor the person you had lost. In my opinion, living with grief is lifelong journey. Just like loving my daughter is a lifelong journey. If I love my daughter for the rest of my life, if I love my children for the rest of my life and even beyond, then grief that's left behind when my daughter was murdered is a lifelong too. But I am hoping, remember, I don't have the final answer, but I'm hoping it's one that leads to growth. Just like loving her led to growth, losing her, I'm hoping would lead to a growth. I'm hoping losing her would give me greater purpose in honoring her. In my opinion, I think when we embrace grief as a part of our story, that's when we find a way to carry it with grace. So here is me wishing you today and tomorrow and the days to come as you go through your journey. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Break the Silence, Build the Future, Living with Grief, Making Your Pain into Purpose. If this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Next time, we'll continue this conversation by exploring what it means to turn pain into power and use our stories to inspire change. Until then, take care of yourself and remember, your grief is valid and you are not alone. Thank you.